French humorous illustrator Lucian Metiver was born in Paris in 1863, and other than that nothing seems to be recorded about his early life. But in 1882, when he was 19, he enrolled at the School of Fine Arts in Paris and followed his studies with a year of military service. This would have taken him to sometime around 1886 or 7, but the earliest dated examples I've been able to find are some posters from 1890 onwards. It's a guess on my part, but it's likely he would have been working to get established as an illustrator, and the evidence simply hasn't survived. In 1893, his striking poster for the cabaret performer Eugénie Buffet brought him to wider attention and constituted a real breakthrough in his career. The client liked the poster enough to request another, and with this exposure many other clients began lining up to commission him. Métivet's first cover for the humour weekly Le Rire appeared in 1894, and he quickly became a frequent contributor to the magazine, with many covers and satirical interior illustrations to his credit in the years that followed. Within a couple of years he was also creating comical illustration for other prominent satirical magazines, including L'Assiette au Beurre and La Bayonnette. And in this immensely prolific period, Métivet also took several commissions to illustrate works of fiction, some of which was for children and some for adults only, but all of it humorous to one extent or another. His popularity continued and grew throughout the first decade of the 20th century, and in addition to his commercial commissions, he also published albums of collections of his work, which sold well and greatly increased his earnings. The posters he created during his career were invariably compelling and well-composed images, and they were undoubtedly created directly onto lithographic stone, with additional print runs for each of the colours. But when it came to his book and magazine work, it seems he was working with pen or brush on paper. The line work was invariably calligraphic and frequently enhanced with crayon or charcoal shading. And when using colour, which was much more frequently, he applied transparent washes over the line. On occasion there was also flatter, more graphic illustration, created as monochrome drawings, which then had spot colours added at printing. But whatever his methods, all of his work was never less than visually arresting and eloquent. During the First World War he created several covers for La Bayonnette, and even more for Le Rire Rouge. And although one or two remained staunchly upbeat, predictably most of these images used humour which was considerably darker and vehemently anti-German. Once the war had ended, he returned again to more light-hearted material, and in addition to work for his usual client base, he also wrote and illustrated some of his own books, including the satirical Jean qui lit et snobinet, which was also a popular success. Métivet died in 1932 at the age of 69, and had managed to create a vast amount of influential comic illustration in a career of nearly 40 years. American illustrator Louis M. Glackens was born in 1866 in Philadelphia, the older brother of the painter William Glackens. As soon as Louis left school, he immediately started working as a professional illustrator for local newspapers, despite having had no formal art education whatsoever. But I haven't managed to unearth anything by him that's verifiable before 1892, when he was already 26 years old. So, just like Lucien Metiver, it's quite probable his earlier work simply hasn't survived. In that year, his pen and ink illustrations for the bizarrely titled humorous book The Last Tenet Imposed Upon the Khan of Tomathos were published, and they were well received. More significantly, he also began working for the humour magazine Puck around the same time, and he rapidly became one of their most popular and enduring artists. During his 2 decades with the magazine, Glackens created a vast number of humorous illustrations, poking fun at a wide range of subjects, both frivolous and serious. His monochrome pen, brush and ink drawings demonstrated his particularly fluid calligraphic line work, and with a wide range of precise expressive strokes, he was able to create extremely plausible solidity and suggestion of animation in his characters. But the majority of his images for the magazine were in colour, and for these he applied transparent washes over the line. but with a much flatter graphic finish than that of most of his contemporaries. Consequently, other than the now dated nature of his subjects and settings, his work looked remarkably modern more than a century later. During his time at Puck, he created a series of covers in colour, which in themselves constituted a large and particularly impressive body of comic illustration. And in addition, there were a large number of impressive and complex double-page spreads, commenting on the issues and politics of the time. Among other features, there were also narrative comic strips, and a series titled In Colonial Days, which comically portrayed the arrival and early exploits of the Founding Fathers in America. Unfortunately for Glackens and his colleagues at Puck, in 1915 the magazine changed hands to a new publisher, who allowed the magazine to wither and die not long after. This of course created a large hole in his professional life, so Glackens compensated with a sideways move into animation, and he was involved with over 20 films for Brace Studios. Whether he worked on the clip I'm showing and in what capacity is anybody's guess, but it does date from the years of his involvement and is typical of the studio's early output. Although Puck had been by far his primary source of income, in addition to his animation work, he did continue to create colour and monochrome illustrations for other publications. And the last piece of dated work I found was in 1929. I don't know if he retired or just ran out of clients, but Louis Glackens died not long after in 1933 at the age of 67. And it's hard to think of an illustrator more deserving of greater exposure and respect. Children's illustrator and writer Margaret Taran was born in London in 1888, the daughter of the successful watercolour artist Percy Tarrant. In her teens she studied at Heatherley's School of Art, followed by more study at Guildford School of Art. Her first success came when she was just 20 years old, and she was commissioned to illustrate an edition of Charles Kingsley's The Water Babies, which was published in 1908. This was a highly prestigious entrance into the world of commercial illustration, and the series of charming watercolour images she created for the book immediately established her as an illustrator of considerable merit. And in 1910 she followed this early success with an equally atmospheric visualisation of the tales of Hans Christian Andersen. This book also proved to be very popular, and with a remarkable demonstration of productivity, in the same year she also illustrated another children's classic, the stories of French writer Charles Perrault, another perfect pairing of illustrator and writer. It was obvious from the assurance of the work in these books that she was already fully in control of her technique, and despite her relative youth, it seemed as if she'd been illustrating books for decades. In 1912 she illustrated a version of the tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin written by the poet Robert Browning, and in 1916 she became another in an apparently endless line of illustrators to tackle Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. And once again she created a series of agreeable fantasy images, the equal certainly of most other attempts, even if the surreal menace of the Tenniel originals had evaporated completely in her more child-friendly visualization. Tarrant was adept as a line-only illustrator, and most of her books featured monochrome spot illustrations and silhouettes. But it was the overwhelming volume and quality of her delicate, enchanting watercolour work which made her reputation. Throughout the 1920s she continued to produce yet more illustration for specific stories and some more generic volumes, including various collections of nursery rhymes and an edition of Mother Goose in 1929. And the enduring popularity of her illustrations led to other printed merchandise material, such as postcards, greeting cards and calendars, featuring reprints of her existing work, and this generated yet more income. And you can still buy them almost a century later. Following a trip to the Holy Land in the mid-1930s, she began creating religious watercolour painting. These were sold as framed prints, and as with her other work, they continued to be popular into the 1950s. Sadly, at that time her general health and particularly her eyesight were deteriorating rapidly, and in 1958 she went to join her friend and fellow illustrator Molly Brett in Cornwall, where she died a year later at the age of 71. When it comes to Japanese illustrators such as Shigeru Hatsuyama, I have to admit I'm out of my depth. I'm not even sure I got his name the right way round. And it's fairly likely there will be only occasional connection between the narration and the pictures shown. But his work is strangely compelling, so I think it's worth making a fool of myself over. Shigeru was born in Tokyo in 1897, and at the age of only 10 he began creating patterns for kimonos at a local workshop, and he stayed there for the next 5 years, at which point he had some tuition from the painter and illustrator Ikawa Sengai. He struggled to make any real progress as an illustrator, and although he was submitting drawings to magazines, everything he submitted was rejected. And to make some money he returned briefly to designing kimonos, and even tried unsuccessfully to be an actor. But his luck started to change in 1919 when he was 22 years old. In that year he was commissioned to illustrate the cover of the first issue of the children's magazine Otogi no Sekai, which translates into English as Fairy World. And he went on to create every cover up to its final issue in 1923. He also began creating limited edition woodblock prints around this time. Some were published in a short-lived arts magazine, but quite a few were sold to collectors. And the additional income from his art career contributed greatly to making him more financially stable. There were children's books too, and among them what to Westernize is a rather obtuse but absorbing interpretation of the Tales of Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1925. In 1928 he began working for the children's magazine Komodo no Kuni, meaning Children's Land, and it was the vast amount of imagery he produced for them up to 1936 which really made his reputation. Other than the obvious woodblock work, I'm struggling with the specifics of his use of media. Some is undoubtedly pen, ink and watercolour, but there are also other examples which may or may not be solid blocks of painted colour, and there is also evidence of mixed media and collage. But whatever he was using, the results were astonishingly diverse and provided clear evidence of a powerful creative imagination and a highly developed aesthetic sensibility. During the years of the Second World War, Shigeru didn't create any illustration and concentrated entirely on his woodblock prints. When peace returned, he did illustrate more books, but it was primarily printmaking which had continued to occupy his time. And Shigeru Hatsuyama died in 1973 at the age of 76 following a fire at his home. And that wraps up this quartet, and I hope to see you with the next 4 soon. Thanks as ever for watching, and goodbye for now.